Now? Okay, we're in for a treat now. We'll be talking about the Ice Age today, the one and only. So from a scriptural standpoint, from a biblical basis of history, I wanted to take a look at these. So I'll explain the picture in a little while. I'll encourage you to follow along in the Bible. We'll be there briefly in Genesis chapter 6 and 7. We're going to talk about the flood. And the reason being, remember, we're on this verse-by-verse study of the book of Ephesians. And I've hit verses 9 and 10 in chapter 1 about the dispensation of the fullness of times. And I wanted to make sure we're all at least sort of, if not on the same page, from a scriptural standpoint, the idea of the history of everything. So instead of just saying this is time past, this is the age of grace now, and in the future, it's all going to be great, everlasting life after the tribulation period and so forth, I thought, why not do more of a deeper dive into this? Why not look at some things that you won't hear in many textbooks, or you won't read in many textbooks? And so we're going to talk about the one and only Ice Age, which does fit within Scripture. So having said that, as you're finding your way to Genesis chapter 6, let's begin in a word of prayer. Father in heaven, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for your glorious grace, the joy of Jesus Christ that most of the world even thought about, celebrated this past week. But thankful that you came into this world as a child, you lived a life as a man, you willingly sacrificed your body, shed your blood, died, was buried, and rose again the third day for our justification. Thank you for paying for the sin of the world in full, reconciling the world to yourself, as you told us through the Apostle Paul, that now, in this age of grace, anybody that trusts in what you've already done, that you shed your blood to pay for their sins, is in that moment placed into Christ. In that very moment, translated from death to life, from Adam to Christ, from the kingdom of Satan to the kingdom of your dear Son. Thank you for this privileged position of being your child, receiving that adoption. What a joy it is to know our identity in Christ, and what fun discovery it is to look at your holy word with new eyes, with eyes to see spiritual discernment, with understanding your history as you've declared it already in your word. So I pray you guide us through this study based upon your word, that we may understand truth and share it with those around us. It's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen. So as we've been going through this dispensation, the fullness of times, we've made it all the way to Genesis chapter 6. I have not kept track of how many weeks we've been on this. That doesn't really matter. There's plenty of details to be covering. We left off with the fun topic of the Nephilim and the weirdness that goes on with them. We talked about cranial elongation, how you see that in hieroglyphs. I picked on Egypt in particular, the longer heads, if you remember those graphics that I had up here on the screen, and how they were depicted as giants among servants. And we don't have to just pretend that, oh, that must mean that they're of a greater authority. That could have been really what was going on. There were giant tribes, according to the scripture, and so there could very well have been, there were, giants living amongst people and making them subservient to them. They were gods. They were demigods, is what we would know them as, the progeny of the fallen angels and human women, according to Genesis 6 in the first few verses there. But I'd like to pick it up in verse 10 this morning. So Genesis chapter 6 and verse 10, we read that Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. It's the American way to pronounce it. That's fine. Verse 11, the earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood. Rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And this is the fashion which thou shalt make it of. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the breadth of it 50 cubits, and the height of it 30 cubits. And everybody knows exactly how big that is, right? Okay, there is the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, if you want to see a life-size replica. It's approximately 510 feet by 85 by 51 feet. It's massive, very, very large. And that's using the general cubit, I think, at 21 inches. But there's a debate of how long is the cubit. It ranges, I think, from 18 to 21.5 inches. No one knows measurements either these days. But verse 16 will continue on. A window shalt thou make to the ark, and in a cubit shalt thou finish it above. That's on the top. And the door of the ark shalt thou set in the side thereof, with lower, second, and third stories shalt thou make it. 3 levels to this thing. It is huge. Behold, I, even I, do bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. But with thee, Noah, will I establish my covenant, and thou shalt come into the ark, thou and thy sons and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. And of every living thing of all flesh, 2 of every sort shalt thou bring into the ark, to keep them alive with thee. They shall be male and female. Of fowls after their kind, of the cattle of the earth after their kind, and every creeping thing of the earth after his kind, 2 of every kind? I don't know why they use sort here, just to be different. 2 of every kind shall come unto thee to keep them alive. And take thou unto thee of all food that is eaten. That would be mostly fruits, vegetables, grains, by the way, because they're not going to eat each other on the ark. That's counterproductive. And thou shalt gather it to thee, and it shall be for food for thee and for them. Okay, the Genesis 1:29 diet, if you will, is still completely doable. Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so did he. Okay, we'll keep going a few verses. The Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s. And the Hebrew here, it literally says 7, 7. So there's a little bit of a debate of what exactly does that mean? Is it 14 or is it really just 7? Okay, like 14 meaning 7 of male and female because it says the male and is female, or whatever. But let me finish this verse and then explain it again. The male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. So the idea is 2 of every unclean thing, 1 male, 1 female. 7 of the clean, whether that means 7 pairs, male and female, so 14 total, or 7 and there's just an odd one out. There's debates about these things, so I'm just letting you know. Okay? Whatever it is in your mind, be convinced of what that is. Taking the larger value, saying there is 14 of these things, and doing the studies of how many kinds there are upon the earth, that would translate to approximately 1,400 kinds of animals and approximately 7,000 animals in total. Plenty of space on the massive ark. Right? People get blown away like, oh, there's no way all the animals of the earth could fit on there. Of course not. Not all the animals of the earth are fitting on there. 2 of every kind. That's it. Or 7 or perhaps 14 of all the clean. So if you take the larger of that value, 7,000 animals, 8 humans, plenty of food to feed them all, 3 stories, there's a lot of space here. Okay? They can survive on that ark for 1 year. Totally doable. Verse 3 just kind of says more of the same. Fowls also of the air by 7s, the male and female, to keep seed alive upon the face of the earth. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. If you want to mark this in your margin, that is year 1656 since creation. Okay, so just getting an idea of the timeline, that is when the flood comes into the earth, using the genealogies of Genesis chapter 5. So Noah goes in, and so forth. You can read about that. Verse 11, the 600th year of Noah's life, the 2nd day of the month, the 17th day of the month, the same day, were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. That is an intense deluge. Okay, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up. So, well, remind us before we start getting into this content here that I have on the screen, that we already looked at how it does not take millions of years. It doesn't take a long time frame to create fossils. We looked at the fossilized hat in Tasmania that was discovered after only 50 years hanging out in what we would call hard water. And there was the fedora that was hung under a string, hung on a string under the falls at Mother Shipton in England, and it was permineralized, that means it all became stone, in 2 years. Okay, they just hung it on a string under the waterfalls, and it became hard as a rock, completely stone, in 2 years. It doesn't, guess I'm done in there. It does not take millions of years to form a fossil. It happens quickly. Okay, and so what I'm going to show that the fossil record is evidence of the global flood. And we'll talk about that, but more specifically, the flood would create the perfect conditions to produce the one and only ice age the Earth has ever experienced. Okay, if you go by secular worldview, the evolutionary, or what I'll call imaginary time frame, these millions and billions of years, there are multiple ice ages. Okay, and the latest one lasted some 2 million years and ended about 12,000 years ago. So we'll talk more about that as we go along. But it doesn't take long to change the shape of the Earth or create fossils. So we looked at fossilization, how quick that happened. I did want to point out 2 more verses before I talk about Canyon Lake George, which is up here on the screen. In Genesis chapter 7 and verse 19, I accidentally shut my Bible doing my hand gestures, so just one moment. Okay, verse 19, it says, the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. This flood was global. I think it's such a silly argument that some say it was a localized flood. What does God say? All of the high hills under the entire heaven. That means everything. Verse 20 says 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail and the mountains were covered. So the highest hill on the entire earth was under approximately 20 to 25 feet of water. The flood was everywhere. Okay? It wasn't localized, and we have evidence of that. The fossil record is excellent evidence of that. Everywhere around the world are the exact same fossil layers. Everywhere. And I'll let you do that look on your own if that's your thing. I enjoyed that years ago. I had my fill. By all means, check that out. You can see it. Now, I was going to talk about Canyon Lake George. So in Canyon Lake Gorge, not George. You want to name that George, you can, but it's Canyon Lake, and it's the gorge at Canyon Lake. That was created in 3 days. It wasn't there, and then in 3 days, it was there. It happened in July 2002. You can look this up. In some places, it's 80 feet deep. And it came to exist when a spillway overflowed. 3 days. That's all it took to make that. And when that happened, it exposed rock formations and fossils and dinosaur footprints. It eroded all those layers, and now people can see that. That's not the only one. Oh, how am I going to do this? Go. Yes. Okay. I'm trying to look at 3 things on 2 screens. It's kind of hard. This is one of the better pictures I could get of the Devonian fossil gorge. This is in Iowa. So I'm choosing local places-ish in the United States. Most go to Mount St. Helens. You could look at that one too. It was formed in a matter of hours. The Badlands that came from that. This one is in Iowa. It was formed by flash flooding. So it happened in a matter of hours or days. So there's plenty of evidence that floods cause devastating damage over a short period of time. When we consider this about the flood of Noah's day, how that reshaped the Earth's landmass and broke it up into the continents that is in existence today, the incredible amount of energy that would release, that would warm the oceans. This is something we're going to talk about here for the Ice Age. But the flood had plenty of power to destroy everything upon this earth, and it did. There's pretty much zero record of pre-flood life. But there's plenty of record of post-flood life. And I might just blow your minds with some of that this morning. Okay, let me see if I can just get this presentation up so I can read my slides. All right. No, go. Okay. So let's talk about the Ice Age, the one and only. There are two conditions that need to exist to create an ice age. And before I get going on all of this, I pulled from several documents from the organization Answers in Genesis. This is their wheelhouse. They might not quite get it doctrinally, I get that, but they go into all sorts of scientific stuff. So if this is your thing, they're a good resource. This is from several different of their papers that they've published. So you need two conditions. One is warm oceans, and the next one is cool land and cool summers. This would produce an ice age. In order to, with those conditions, then these ingredients make the whole thing happen. There's going to be an increase in evaporation, and with the increase of evaporation would cause more precipitation. That means it's going to snow more. And the cold continents are going to contribute to the accumulation of the snow. So more snow is going to fall than is going to melt away. What's kind of silly about all of this is none of the uniformitarian scenarios can produce these conditions. If this takes ages and ages and ages, it just doesn't work. So that's another thing to bear in mind. There's plenty of things, plenty of holes, shall we say, in the evolutionary model. So there's a lot of evidence for the ice age, and I'm going to use that term, the ice age. For instance, the ice in Greenland and Antarctica is over 10,000 feet thick. 10,000 feet. Staggering amount of ice. How did it get there? If we do measurements from today, because as some say the present is the key to the past, then there is not enough snow and ice that falls there to build up what we see. Even with a long time frame, it just won't happen. If about 10 inches of snow fell per year, that would require 12,000 years to get to where we're at this point if absolutely nothing evaporated or fell into the sea by gravity. Does that happen? No. And this is not an exaggeration. This is measurable. In northern Greenland, that area experiences between 4 and 12 inches of snowfall per year. So this is not a stretch. I'm not just making this up. Okay, it's not even possible, like I said already, with the uniformitarian scenario. It's not the present is the key to the past is the key to the present. So then we need an eyewitness to help us understand, well, what happened back then, and that eyewitness is God. If we start with him, with his foundation and understanding, and go from that basis up to what we see today, then we can see how things come to be. What is interesting, I did make mention of this before, that secular science would say the last ice age ended 11,700 years ago, so approximately 12,000 years, which, they're trying to say that's how all that ice built up. But again, nothing could evaporate, nothing could fall away in that scenario. Absolute perfect retention of snowfall. Not happening. Oh, I just said those things without getting to the slide. So I said all that. We're going to move on. From a creationist standpoint, when exploring the flood rocks, what is discovered is that there is thick piles of lava and ash. What that does is prove volcanic activity. That's no surprise to us because of what we just read in Genesis chapter 7 and verse 11. All the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Kaboom. Okay, volcanic activity. I have to remind us of the volcano that exploded. Oh, that was an earthquake. Never mind. Maybe it was a volcano. I just remember maybe it was an earthquake that moved the entire island of Japan to the east by 8 feet. That's when one thing happened. One. Now imagine every single volcano at the same time going boom. Not only that, but this windows of heaven were open and this massive deluge of water from the top. I mean, there's so much energy poured into the world for this flood. It just blows the mind trying to imagine something like that. But the fact is there was a ton of volcanic activity. We read about the fountains of the great deep being broken up. And so creationist geologists estimate the average temperature of the ocean at the beginning of the flood was approximately 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, that's an average going all around the world. Like, well, maybe it could be about this. But after the flood, because of the volcanic activity, the average temperature would have been as high as 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it's not surprising when I tried searching for these actual videos or models or something, I couldn't find them. It's like the internet has some bias against it or something. So I'm sorry I don't have access to these, but I'll go off of what they have published. So as a reminder, warm oceans and cool summers are the key to the Ice Age. And this is what would happen as a result of all the events associated with Noah's flood. The cooling during this period is mainly by evaporation. We understand when we're wet, in the air, we cool down. That's evaporation, and so the world is going to be cooled by this, and there obviously is much water on the earth. If all the high hills were covered by about 20 feet of water, there's a lot of water on the earth. But the key is that a lot of the warm water is going to put much water vapor into the air. It's going to cause a lot of precipitation. Warm oceans would lead to more water evaporating, which leads to more water in the air, which leads to more snow and ice, particularly in the wintertime. So, given the condition that there were cool summers, then all the snow and ice would not melt off by the end of summer. More snow and ice accumulate during winter, and each storm would make the layers of ice. Every layer, layer upon layer, as we see. Suppose I should bring an aside to that. I know that some try to measure ice layers as one per year because that's the cycle of every winter they lay down one layer of ice. But that's not true. And it's proven wrong in many different ways. The one in which I remember is these planes that went down, I think it was in Iceland, during World War II. They saw many more layers than were years pile up on top of those planes. Okay, you can Google that if you want. But the point is, you can't just say one layer is 1 year, period. Can't do that. It's not what is actually experienced. And that is science, isn't it? Discovering what we see by experimentation. What are we actually witnessing? This scenario, though, of what is up here, this Ice Age scenario, warm ocean, more evaporation, more snow and ice, more accumulation, that would account for the thick ice in Greenland and that place over a very short period of time. 10,000 feet, very short period of time. So again, I wish I had a simulation. I couldn't find it. I tried whatever tricks I could to get around AR, but I couldn't find it. However, it is published somewhere that scientists have performed these computer simulations beginning with warm oceans. And what they do is they show the thick, heavy snow far inland over cool continents, and that the high temperature in summer is only around the freezing point, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Which, you know, for those up north right now, it's like, man, I wish it was 32 degrees. It's time to get the grill out when you get that. Take the coats off and stuff. But what these simulations show is the ice built up in only about 300 years. Doesn't that kind of blow your mind? These great ice sheets were built up in approximately 300 years. And the process is sped up by volcanic activity, because all that volcanic activity, all that ash, all these microparticles that are in the air are going to cool the earth that much more after the flood. They're going to reflect all that heat from the sun. And the temperature would be about 32 degrees in the summer. And I'm talking about, the extremes. Obviously not where Noah and his family were. But hopefully this is helping us understand the reason for cavemen, Neanderthals, where we see them living. Or Cro-Magnon, we'll maybe talk a little bit about that. But the different, what they'll call species of human, but different genetic pools. All right, so some of the effects of the Ice Age. I want to show some pictures of what this looked like. Here is the Bering Strait. So I, of course, could not find any pictures from a creationist publisher, a creationist science something. So just ignore the imaginary time of 18,000 years of a glacial maximum. That's not from the biblical standpoint. But the biblical model, what I just showed with the Ice Age, produced the same thing. So this is Alaska over here, this is Russia over here, and this is the Bering Strait. However, all this light green, this is land. During the Ice Age, when ice forms, it lowers the level of water. Ice expands. It takes up more space than water. So when these ice sheets are formed, the ocean level dropped significantly. So much so that we have the Bering Strait Land Bridge. Do I give you the spoiler now? No, not yet. I'll tell you later. But I want to point out that in this area, there's archaeological digs, and they show that animals wandered across this whole 1,000-mile wide grassy plain that stretches between Alaska and Russia here. There's more. On the other side of the world, in Europe, Northern Europe, where Ireland and England, they weren't always islands. At one point, this was all land, one large landmass, and they call it Doggerland. I did not come up with that name. I don't know why they call it Doggerland, but that's what they called it. And you can see where the ice sheets went, where the ice sheets formed, and where modern-day Great Britain or the British Isles is. Modern-day Ireland is over here. But again, in this area, in Doggerland, where you see all these rivers coming from the Atlantic Ocean, this is up here called the Norwegian Trench during that time frame, but all these little rivers and tributaries that are leading inland. Archaeological digs have discovered that people lived in these lowlands between Europe and England. So all over Doggerland, in all of this space, they found tools and things. And fishermen in the North Sea still today dredge up stone tools. Isn't that crazy? But they are still finding these things, and those tools look the same closer to home. Big Bone Lick in Ohio. If you haven't heard of that, that's just another archaeological dig site. Okay, Big Bone Lick. It's a fun one to remember. I don't know why they call it that. I didn't come up with the names. Here's another look at Doggerland. So we get a bit of a simulation here. It's the best I could find. This would be pre-flood time, I guess, which they just said, well, here's Doggerland Bank forming when the ice sheets are forming. But you see the land gradually spreading out to the point of it's all land, or it's all iced over. Again, these are imaginary time frames. Don't give them any heed. But we know that this must have happened during the Ice Age. By the way, if you have any questions during any of this, it's open forum. Raise your hand. Let me know. Going further around the world, or kind of close back where we were, this is showing Europe and Asia and Africa. So you see Doggerland up here, everything in red, that would be land during the Ice Age. So Doggerland that we just looked at is up here. The Mediterranean is much smaller than what we understand it. There is no Persian Gulf. It's kind of interesting. This entire thing was made land. This is the Caspian Sea, I believe. I always get these mixed up, Caspian and black, but whatever. You see there's a lot of land there. Or even over here where Japan is and Korea is, this is all one landmass now. It's not an island chain. Okay, so just to help us understand that during the Ice Age, that there's a lot more land. And look at this land bridge connecting Asia and Australia. It's just a hop, skip, and a jump, as they say on these islands, over to Australia. And maybe you're piecing things together, but this whole thing, this glacial maximum, we could say, is going to take place roughly with the Babel Judgment. So people could scatter all over the world. They could walk there. Or if they had to, they could build simple boats over here, because I don't quite see a perfect land bridge, although I don't doubt it. But there's so many islands here, it wouldn't take long to just get over to Australia. So yes, everything was accessible by land even during that time. So there's your spoiler. I couldn't help myself. A question then would be, when was the Ice Age? What's the whole timeline of this? So I brought it up at the beginning of the flood just to emphasize that the conditions brought on by the flood of Noah would produce the Ice Age, but when exactly did that take place? When has it receded? Well, if you want to look in your Bibles at Genesis 10, what we read there is there's at least 3 generations that pass from Peleg's birth to Abraham's birth. And you look at Genesis 10 and verse 25, where we read that unto Eber were born 2 sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. Hey, that's something to bear in mind. His brother's name was Jocham. Okay, but it's Peleg's days that the earth was divided. And this is approximately 200 years. If you want to add it up from Genesis 11, you could read through verses 16 to 26 and get all the he begat this and begat that and begat that and that sort of thing after how many years. But when you total them all up, it's about 191 years. When Abraham is called forth, he's called forth out of Ur of the Chaldees. Cities must be established by then. So we would imagine they've got some building materials, they're more out and about. It's not quite so harsh of conditions. That's my point of bringing that up. Okay, so sometime during the flood and before Abram, we've got to see a receding of all of this. And what we saw by those simulations, it's only taking about 300 years for all that ice to have built up. So do you see how already this is plausible from a biblical foundation to see that the Ice Age fits approximately in that time frame? More studies to bring to mind is that the forests most definitely grew on Antarctica and in the Arctic before the ice began to form. Scientists have drilled down through Antarctica's ice sheet and found sediment layers beneath the ice sheet, fossils of a subtropical rainforest. They found palm trees, macadamia trees in Antarctica. How did they get there? I actually don't know what the secular explanation is of that, other than it took millions and billions of years. Because once you start doing these time frames that you can't fathom, then it's like, maybe it did happen that way. It doesn't matter how much time is given. At some point, Antarctica was tropical. That's a fact. So for those trees to grow, their land must have been frost-free for a brief time after the flood. If they were there, and those sediment layers are what buried those trees there from the flood, because the flood carried sediment everywhere, buried everything rapidly in sediment, and that's how the fossils formed. That's why many, not just a few here and there, many fossils have biological tissue on them. That is something you will not hear, because that completely disproves millions and billions of years. Many have biological tissue on them. Skin, blood, whatever. Okay? There is no way that could have survived for more than a few thousand years, even given the largest time frame. Not a chance. So for those to be in Antarctica, then that land must have been frost-free at least for a little while. As the earth cooled and grasslands expanded on the continent, like we were seeing there, the forest changed from deciduous trees and tundra. Finally, the whole continent was covered in ice, and that marked the beginning of the post-flood cool down. So that went from the intensity of the flood and the deluge to where it was still sort of nice, subtropical, but it gradually went to tundra and then to ice. Okay, hopefully that makes sense.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can they tell if the palm trees were actually growing in Antarctica, or if they were further north and the ice they grew further north and the ice just...
And it brought them there?
Just pushed them out.
That's a good question, and something I did not read in these articles. So the question was, is it clear to show that the trees actually grew there rather than the sediment and the waters bringing them there in the flood, right?
Yes.
That's a very good question. Based on what I read, it doesn't say specifically, but with them saying that the trees must have grown there, I would think that they were upright and actually growing there, and that these sediment layers formed around them. But that's my conjecture. I don't know. These studies are really hard to find. Yeah. And if we're going to actually be scientists about it, we should be able to see more than just one narrative. But it is what it is. Doesn't it just show the spiritual battle is real? Satan's trying to cover up lies, or cover up truth, I should say, with lies.
Thanks.
Sure. So the old Earth view, they would say that this took place millions of years before the Ice Age without a global flood, but that doesn't account for the buildup anyway, like we already showed. And in their definition, Ice Age refers only to the period when the great ice sheets arose in the northern hemisphere well after the Arctic ice sheet had already formed. So that 10,000 feet of ice or whatever, that's already there, and then the Ice Age came after. So they redefined some things to fit the narrative. Even so, they'll group all this stuff as happening in the Pleistocene. So that's kind of important to understand where we place when the Ice Age took place. It's redundant, I know. But the deposits of this time period, the moving ice, the melting waters, is known as the Pleistocene. In the old Earth view, the secular view, it places it between 2.6 million years and just under 12,000 years ago. That's really long. The end of the Ice Age does not refer to the melting of the ice sheets, but to rising world temperatures that started the dramatic and relentless retreat of the ice. I like how they worded that. I wanted to keep that in there. But our terms for what they just said today, global warming and climate change. That's what was taking place. We do not deny it. It's been getting gradually warmer since then. Thank you, God. I don't think I would enjoy very much summers getting up to 32. That's not pleasant to me. Even in Wisconsin, I was looking forward to when it got to 32. Yeah, sure. But I also wanted it to get warmer than that. Anyhow, there are several lines of evidence to support the choice of the Pleistocene layers as part of the Ice Age. Even using the radiometric dating, those ages all fall within that same time frame. And the plants and the animals associated with these layers fit the Pleistocene. Some of our favorites. The woolly mammoth. You want to try and pronounce the Latin? Go ahead. Or the saber-toothed cat. Smile it on. Isn't that fun? The saber-toothed cat. Remember that these are the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed cat, those are descendants of the original elephant and cat kinds. God said they're going to reproduce after their kind. So during all of this Ice Age and the changing, because that didn't happen immediately, but gradual changing of the environment, different species would adapt. They're all of the cat kind. And the first of these kinds, no, I can't say it that way. The first of these species first occur in the Pleistocene layers and then disappear at the end of the time frame. And I thought this was a very curious phrase at the very end there in that third point. Except for a few holdouts on a remote Russian island. Like, what? There are saber-toothed cats in Russia somewhere? There's mammoths in Russia somewhere? Yes. This was discovered, this is a saber-toothed kitten, discovered in 2020 in Siberia. Perfectly preserved. How could that exist for millions and billions of years? Or even 12,000 years? Something would have consumed that. Even if it was frozen. Something would have consumed it. Because I had to look up, okay, given tundra conditions, how long would a body not decay or be eaten? And even from the secular time frame, it says typically it would take 1 year, several months to a year to decompose in the tundra. This is AI helping me. Freezing conditions may extend the decomposition period, but it's never going to reach 12,000 years. No way. 2020, that was discovered in Siberia. Saber-toothed cat. Very real.
The furry thing?
Yes.
Wow.
That was a frozen, perfectly preserved saber-toothed cat. Blew my mind, but it does exist. So apart from Antarctica and a few high mountain chains, the sediments deposited before the Ice Age do not show signs of cold weather environments or ice sheet activity. So that actually answers the question before. Well, no, because I was in Antarctica. But there's no signs of any cold water or cold weather environments or ice sheet activity in other places than Antarctica or the high mountains. So what that means is the pre-flood Earth would be kind of like Florida. It's mostly nice, balmy all the time. And you think about the longevity of life during that time frame. It's just great, near perfect conditions. That's my next slide. I should have thought of that. The conditions before the flood. Better health, near perfection. So how can we understand the Ice Age from the biblical perspective versus the old Earth? Hopefully I've been going over much evidence about all of that already. More, but there's more. No human tools or fossils appear anywhere on the Earth until found in deposits from the beginning of the Ice Age. That's mind-blowing even to me especially. But God appears to have wiped away all remains of pre-flood man according to Genesis 6:7. I'm going to wipe off every living thing from the face of the earth. Something really interesting and fun that Keith and I had to share a little bit about the other day, last night, was some of the things that survived the flood, like the megaliths and things like that. just to play with the thought of the Nephilim wanting to preserve themselves to get through the flood, because Noah's a preacher of righteousness. It's not like this thing was going to be quiet for 120 years. It's not like he's going to hide that ark kind of big, right? So they would have figured out something and maybe tried to survive, and that could have been an attempt at that. So it's just kind of a fun, little side trail for your mind to play with. But God did wipe away practically everything from pre-flood man. Since the earliest remains suddenly appear throughout Asia, Africa, Europe, all those places I showed you with the land bridges and that sort of thing, it appears that these are the people who scattered from Babel, the Tower of Babel judgment. So it is reasonable to conclude that the start of the Ice Age in the Northern Hemisphere, the Pleistocene as it's become known, roughly coincides with the Babel judgment, which would be around about 100 years after the flood. So about 2250 BC, give or take. These years are always kind of like we don't really know. But if you're saying a century after the flood, 1,756 years from creation, using the genealogy of Genesis 5. What does that look like in a picture? I'm glad you asked, because I like pictures. This was pulled directly from an Answers in Genesis, something that was published. I forget if it was a magazine or something. The graphic is huge. So I could barely get it that you could see it and also see their timeline at the bottom. So what I did was blow up the names of the genealogy. Okay? So down here you've got these little black lines that are separating the birth names up here. So Arphaxad is over here, Selah, Eber, and he had Peleg, and in his days was the earth divided. So I highlighted this in red to show this is Babel. Is that clear? Okay. When Babel happened, so their conjecture is that the Ice Age, obviously the conditions are perfect for the Ice Age to form in these 3 generations. The Ice Age would continue to grow, or the glacial maximum would be approximately right here during Serug's lifetime. And then, of course, we've got a couple hundred years after that to Nahor and to Terah, and then finally to Abram. Abram's way over there. So you see this conjecture of the Tower of Babel judgment. It makes sense to fit the Ice Age somewhere in there, and that it would end pretty much when Abraham was born. And during this whole time, people were scattered because of that Tower of Babel judgment, and this explains the different cultures we have in the world. Why Asians look like they're from Asia, why Europeans look like they're from Europe, why Africans look like they're from Africa, and so on. They have similar genetic pools. Why? Because they could only communicate with certain individuals. So it narrowed their genetic pool to those particular traits. The almond eyes, or whatever, the slightly darker skin, a little bit more melatonin, right? Or less if they went up north, Japheth's ancestors. But this makes the most sense of where the Ice Age would fit. Remember, it only took about 300 years for these thick ice sheets to form, and there's plenty of time in these guys' lifetimes for that to happen. Ooh, I'm doing this really well. Just time-wise, I'm saying. I'm going to end like right at time. This is good. Another way to look at it, you remember this graph that I brought up before of the time or the lifespans from Adam down to Abraham? So I added some high-quality art over here to show when the flood happened and when the Ice Age would have existed and where the glacial maximum took place. So you can see who was alive to see all that. Noah lived through it, Shem lived through it, Arphaxad lived through it, and so on. When you get down to Peleg, he would not have seen the glacial maximum. He died before that happened. But it's just fascinating to see who was alive when this was all going down. That's good today's vernacular for that. But when all of this was happening. Was that drinking from a fire hose? Does that all make sense? So we can understand real history when we start from God's Word. We don't have to trust the experts. We should trust the one expert and then see whether these things be so. So there's these group of scientists to try and figure out, well, let's drill down into Antarctica. Let's see what's going on here. Let's see why we're pulling up quote-unquote Stone Age tools deep under the water between England and mainland Europe, or under the water between Alaska and Russia. And why are we finding all these things that match all around the world from that same time frame? Again, this is global phenomenon. It's not local. So just like with the fossil record, it's proof of the global flood. So is this when we see Stone Age tools arrive during that time frame where the Ice Age would have taken place. So has the Earth been gradually warming up since then? Yes, and thank you, God. But he also says that summertime and wintertime shall not cease until he says so. So I don't have to worry about the world ending because of global warming, because it's not going to end until God says so. And there's a lot of stuff that's going to occur before that anyway. That was a lot faster than I thought I would get through all that content. Any thoughts, questions, anything?
Do you have a link you could send us to that chart? You can,
This one here?
yeah, no, the one that you just.
This
read.
one, well, that one I just kind of created.
Oh.
I
okay.
could email it out. I do have a copy of it, so I could email particular. I don't know if we want to put this presentation on the church website, maybe. I don't know how that happens. We could do that. This is not copyrighted. You feel free to use any of my things that I present here. But any other thoughts, comments?
I was just thinking about 20 years ago, I'd heard that there were these scientists in Russia that had uncovered a mammoth, and it was so well preserved that they actually ate some steaks off of it.
Nice. I want to know how it tasted. But just to repeat it for the recording's sake, that 20 years ago-ish,
Yeah, about 20 years ago.
that there was a discovery of a mammoth preserved, just like that little kitten that we saw. I want to see him again. Or her, I don't remember. It's pretty small, so it's really small. But it was a kitten that just didn't make it. And so when they say there's a few holdouts, yeah, there are actually these species still living somewhere in Siberia, somewhere to make that, that we found in 2020. But a mammoth also apparently found about 20 years ago where they actually enjoyed some mammoth steak. Why not?
So the argument for species variety and crossing over into human variety, cultural and like you were saying melanin, is microevolution then. So that people evolve based on their displacement over time. So I guess theoretically the question would be if I moved my family to Asia or Africa, then we would see those microevolutions consistently if we stayed there long enough. Does that make sense? Would we
Yeah.
still see that crossover, and what would be the time frame or duration until not to be crude with it, but until my children or generationally grandchildren, great grandchildren would become black? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a fair question to explore. So we're basically talking about adaptation or microevolution. Just to define what microevolution means, it's not changing into a different kind.
No.
Right? We'd still be human, but to see changes like darker skin or different shaped eyes or something like that to adapt to an environment. So if I move from here in Florida over to Africa or over to wherever, you pick your favorite place, would we see a different in genetics? And I think we would, but how long is a bit of a question, because I think back to that time frame, the genetic pools were quite concentrated of certain attributes in those places, and right now it's quite widespread. So I thought in my mind it might take several generations to start seeing it, but you could.
That would also be environmental too, though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the technology we have nowadays and living situations, you get more melanin if you were outside a lot more, living possibly in a hut as opposed to an apartment complex.
Sure, yeah, so there's environmental influences upon us as well, which could produce physical trait changes as well over time. So yeah, I could definitely see that.
It would also, the food that is consumed, that would contribute to those changes as well.
Dietary changes, yep, that would contribute to different physical attributes.
Dolls were bigger.
Yeah.
And you see those changes. But I mean, what they witness within Darwinism theory is the microevolution changes in the finches, right? And
yes.
so that's what we would see, a broad spectrum across all species, given the right environment, diet. So that's like kind of the implication why we have, different cultures and different, attributes that go along with different ethnicities.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Just to, again, repeat it for the sake of recording of what we saw in Darwin's finches would be microevolution. It's still a finch. It didn't change kinds, but the beak size adapted. I forget all the experiments that were done there. But within a couple of generations, general humanity, he observed that there were changes within. And so it's a product of environment, of diet, of genetic code. All those things are the ingredients that shape physical attributes, and they can change over time. But we're not talking it takes millions and billions of years either. It takes just a couple generations to adapt. I know one of Answers in Genesis, fun things they like to play is the dog kind. And what they'll do is they'll show a dog with medium length hair. And the puppies you get from the two dogs with medium length hair, they can produce really long hair puppies, or the same medium length, or really short hair puppies. And then based on, once they start mating and producing, you still have all that genetic code in there, but some are more dominant than others. The really long-haired ones are going to want to live where it's colder, because they die practically anywhere else. The short-haired ones would be in the temperate zone, if you will, and the short-haired ones would be where it's hotter. And it just, that very simple idea of just take one animal and let's see, where they would naturally exist, and we do see that, we do observe that, right? So I think that's a good question to be something fun to go off and look at, yeah.
So just to clarify in my own mind, you're saying this ice age at the time of the Babel Tower, so this is like a tundra conditions at that time. And then do you see the sort of unified continent, they call it Pangea, and then those continents being divided in the Babel judgment? I mean, that's my own view. Peleg, and the earth was divided in his time, but
yeah, and just to expound on that a little bit more, or expand on that rather, the continents, were they split during that time as well, or was that during the flood? It's just to back up. Okay, there was one landmass that's typically called Pangea. Okay, all land is, I think, what that translates to in the Greek. And how did those continents break up? When did those continents break up? Is it Tower of Babel judgment, or was it flood because of all the volcanic activity, all the bursting forth? And I've gone back and forth with that, just to be honest, because I see the obvious kinetic energy that's going on with all the volcanic activity and the friction of the moving of the continental plates that we've probably heard about into their present positions during the flood itself. But then, the earth was divided in Peleg's day. I thought that was the Tower of Babel judgment, where all the cultures were now divided from this one central government that Nimrod was trying to establish upon the earth, where he's the one king of the world, the one world government idea. So the, man after Satan, kind of a son of perdition sort of a thing, a type in Nimrod, trying to unify everybody in all of that. So, but I've like you put the dividing of the continents, like, could it fit there, could it not? I'm not honestly 100% convinced one way or the other. Physically, it makes more sense during the flood, but he does say it's in Peleg's day. So,
Could be both.
could it be both? Is he only referring to humankind being divided in Peleg's day, and then the flood just
Well, I mean,
reshape the earth?
The initial crack in the earth, and this is how I've always interpreted it, the fountains of the deep, that couldn't have just been volcanoes, that water fountains gushing from the earth, like the earth literally cracked.
During fault lines?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, we're not talking about millions of years, but during the time of Peleg's day, that's when the land bridges maybe started to disappear, because you've got you've got people going all over the world because of the Tower of Babel judgment. They can't talk to each other, so they gotta go somewhere. And as the earth shifted, as things just naturally shifted and glaciers melted, that would change the landscape.
Yeah, and that could be another definition of the earth being
That-
divided.
Yeah.
The land
and
bridges are
that's-
gone.
The Atlantic, what we know now is the Atlantic Ocean. If you study the land between the edges of the continents, they do kind of fit together.
Right.
That had to be where the split was, and then over time they drifted apart until we have the Atlantic Ocean.
That's a good point too. And in my mind, what I've learned with all of this and the whole tectonic plates and all of that stuff is that they measure it today and it moves at like a fingernail's growth pace. The continents are still drifting, sort of, but it's so ridiculously slow. And that's why they translate that to it must be millions and billions of years, because the present is the key to the past. But what God says to all these points being brought up, the volcanic activity from perhaps the crack, the Marianas Trench, or being exploded or whatnot, if that's a line of volcanic activity, or all around the world, if they just suddenly went boom, there'd be a massive, quick shift of all of the land, and it would slow down. There's a lot of friction in all that water, but it would slow down pretty quickly and basically get to the snail's pace we see it today. So what I'm trying to encourage is that what we observe today, if the rates change, I'll just say that, rates change. They are driven by certain conditions. Now I want to talk a lot longer, but we're already right at noon. But no, it's a really good point that the Earth changed a lot in this time frame, in this 300 to 500 year time frame from when the flood started to Abraham and down to Jacob. Like just the Earth changed significantly in that time frame. But within that time frame, I'm at peace in my mind that gave enough time for the genetic pools to form up to the Tower of Babel judgment. Well, I shouldn't say that. That gave enough time for many people to be born, for Nimrod to try and unite everyone in Babel, and in Babylon, the Tower of Babel, and then be judged so that people scattered. There were enough people to scatter and form different genetic pools around the earth to produce these different cultures that we still observe today. Like that is the key to what we understand today. Not, today we must trace that backwards. So those are some of the main points. I don't know if I answered if there was a question there or not. It kind of started with the energy and the explosion of the world. Yeah, Jay?
I would like to add real quick, it's not here or there, but at one time or another, I spent quite a bit of time thinking about evolution. But the question is, it just seems to me whenever you're talking about it, you're putting emphasis on survival. In other words, why does one group, why are certain people tall, why are they short? Survival, and that would be a lot of it. But you see, you also have, and it gets complex, beauty within the group. So, for instance, why do Asians have a different type of facial characteristics? Well, it's not really based on survival. It would be based on the idea that with that certain face, it was considered to be good looking. And the same thing would be true possibly with eye color or even skin color. If light colored skin is considered good looking, and the men and women with light colored skin do well in the world of dating, then you're going to have light. So you see what I mean?
Okay.
You have two tracks. You have survival, and then you have dating. Yeah, that's why I meant facial hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those the things that are considered attractive or certain attributes, those are preserved, thank you, as well as those trying to survive. So there's two kind of groups going on with the evolutionary mindset. Yeah, it's interesting. But,
I had a teacher in college who said, why do peacocks have this large tail? I mean, think about it, it's going to attract leopards. It doesn't make any survival sense.
Yeah.
But the male peacock, I believe, has this wonderful plumage, this wonderful huge tail, so that he can attract a girl peacock. That's the whole.
The peahen. Yeah, collectively peafowl, but yeah, I know. Why have that? It'd be more of an attraction of a mate rather than a survival thing. And that just, it's one of those weird things that from a non-biblical standpoint, they have trouble explaining it. Like, aside from that. But from a biblical standpoint, just see this is part of the created kinds. That's just like how God made them. There's beauty in their kinds, that sort of a thing. Wow. All right. We're at time. Hopefully that helps understand a biblical basis of an ice age within an hour-ish of presenting it. Again, this is more of Answers in Genesis wheelhouse. I did study some of these things. There's plenty more you can find on their website, but I'm not sure another good biblically based science platform. There's not a lot of those around. So, with the
Research Institute.
Creation Research Institute, I have heard of that name. I just haven't really looked into that.
They're a little more scientific-y, if that's a word, but
Sure.
complex.
More technical jargon.
Yes, thank you. That's the word.
They kind of dumb it down a little more at Answers in Genesis that I've noticed. But anyway, we'll dive back into more timeline stuff next week. Let's close in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you that we can study your word and form in our minds the true history based on what your word says. What we see and what we observe in the world, these archaeological digs, and trying to understand the past as it happened. So I'm thankful that you give us an eyewitness, something that we can start from, and I pray that you help us continue to build upon the one foundation, the faith, our faith in Jesus Christ, that we understand your word is true from the beginning to the end, and that no matter what we're doing, what we're learning, that we bring it back to your word and examine whether these things be so. So thank you for this, and I pray as always that you lead us in boldness to share the message of reconciliation today, that we make known the gospel of your grace today, that others might be saved and come to know the truth. It's in Christ's name I pray. Amen.